I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. In this episode of the Poetry of Predicament, we speak about taking the important inner work of deep adaptation from the very personal to the level of local community action and collaboration. All right, welcome to another round of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, and this is a very special focus of the Poetry of Predicament. I'm really honored today to have a couple of very focused speakers, and what they're focused on is a layer of what I've introduced to this audience. And this audience is pretty clear on a concept called deep adaptation that was brought to the forefront last year in 2018. As Professor Jem Bendell introduced the concept in his now viral paper. He's an academic out of the UK teaching sustainability leadership. And Professor Bendell's really gone on, especially in this year, to create a number of different opportunities for people to engage very personally with the concepts, with the inner workings of what he's come to call deep adaptation, which I think how it lives for me is that these are really just the inner skills that I, as a concerned person on this planet at an extraordinary time, perhaps the most important time in human history, a time of imminent and current collapse of Earth and human systems. What are the inner skills and capacities that I can work on and build and expand in order to be able to be more present in the face of whatever the scale of stressors are that are present in our world? And just a brief mention of, as an example of one of those stressors, I live just above California in Southern Oregon. And all that fills the news these days are massive fires in California that are at the scale that threatens to have significant aspects of California, the world's fifth largest economy, collapse. So these aren't just important fires for the neighborhoods in which they're occurring. The ripple out effects are obviously global when we're talking about the world's fifth largest economy and millions of people affected now. So it's in the name of exploring, taking the components of deep adaptation from that very, very personal inner work frame that we'd like to expand out in this podcast, in this conversation. We'd like to expand those concepts, those elements of personal development that we might want to take on individually, and look at how can that start to express itself as we expand that from the personal to the familial, to my family, to my neighborhood, to my town. I live in Medford, Oregon, a middle-sized American city, and there are as many fragilities, as many of the delicate and finely balanced business as usual structures in place here as anywhere else. We're as vulnerable as any other, particularly in the American or the privileged Western society. And we could use some resilience. We could use some alternative dimensions being proposed, because it's clear, perhaps clearer to me than it's ever been before, with those fires so close and so ridiculously impactful. It's very fresh for me personally. And I want to engage in this conversation as deeply as I can to start exploring these alternatives. Really, the prevailing question I carry is, if not the business as usual fragility of systems and really collapsing systems, then what? So I'd like to introduce Matthew Slater and Stephanie Rearick. Really a pleasure to meet Matthew, who is in the inner circle, if you will, of the Deep Adaptation organization. It's a small organization that's just been working overtime in these past number of months to put together ways for people to participate individually in their communities and around the world, and networking as well with the Deep Adaptation Forum and so on. We'll hear from Matthew in just a few moments. And then Stephanie Rearick, a long-standing activist in exactly this frame, how to bring alternative ideas and structures forward to replace those that are so obviously ill-suited to our future. So the ones that we've all grown up with, and the ones we call normal, and the ones that are obviously crumbling away. So Matthew and Stephanie, welcome. And if you would, one at a time, if you would just fill in a bit more of an introduction of yourself, and how do you fit in this conversation? What's alive for you in this conversation? Matthew, would you begin?
Sure. I think it began for me when I read Small is Beautiful in my 20s, a long time ago. And as I've gone through life, the reasons and drivers for localization have just got more and more and more. And when it came to deep adaptation and thinking about the collapse of civilization, or whatever that means, it's just another reason why we should be turning our economy back from the globalization that's been the watchword of the last 20 years, and think much more about building local and more resilient and more diverse infrastructure. So I've been working with Jem Bendell for the last 10 years on various different things. And since Deep Adaptation started, I've been the general assistant, just keeping things going.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. And Stephanie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience?
Yes, so this is a very interesting topic to me for a long time. So as a young adult, I worked for Greenpeace environmental organization, and so I used to go knock on people's doors and tell them that this was coming, climate change, and we used to share the predictions that people would say were very overhyped and apocalyptic, and it is exactly what's happening now. So part of me has been just like kind of surprised it wasn't happening sooner. So over time, it was when I was working for Greenpeace, and also the variety of things I care about in my life. I'm a musician. That's my favorite thing to do. I am also a local business owner, and I've also been really active in social and environmental justice issues, but social justice issues, especially the mass incarceration and racism problem that we have in our country, especially. And realize that the globalized capitalist economy drives all of these things exactly in the wrong direction, and that was the underpinning. So that's what caused me to choose to learn much more and devote my life right now to changing that, because I realize anything short of changing that economic foundation that's driving everything the wrong direction, anything short of that is like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. So that's what led me to start the Dane County Time Bank in 2005, where we exchange time instead of money. We've experimented a lot with using time banking to be the resource base instead of having to get a grant or have an organization like hire you onto a project. we could use the time bank to pool all our time and talents to be the resource base to do the community projects that we know we need. And so we started with restorative justice projects, a peer-to-peer restorative justice youth courts, supported by time banking and the time bank members to rebuild the social infrastructure that actually helps young people succeed. So we've been really committed to that, and just using time banking to really shift the way we live, to be more in harmony with ourselves, one another, our communities, the planet. And then out of that, I always knew that would be one piece of a more comprehensive economic picture. But out of that, we've developed mutual aid networks. So I am here talking to you as I'm a founder of Humans United in Mutual Aid Networks, which is a global cooperative network aiming to redesign the economy by redesigning our own work lives and those of people in our networks, and really use solidarity economy tools that we espouse, like time banking and mutual credit and sharing, pooling money like mutual aid societies, using those things in service to a good quality of life for ourselves and everyone in our communities, explicitly recognizing that the current late capitalist reality that some and not all of us are living, that this is built on exploited land and labor. It's explicitly racialized capitalism, and we have to recognize that, and we have to, it's absolutely essential as we're creating new structures, or rather often going back to old structures that have been destroyed through violence. As we're building those structures, that we're really focused on redistributing wealth, helping Indigenous people, helping regularly exploited people to regain their own agency and claim to a good, joyful life on this planet. So that's a big way that we have been evolving as humans united in mutual aid networks, and all of us as humans. It's very appropriate. These are huge topics right now. So, and then it's an interesting thing when we talk about collapse, because there have been many collapses over the course of human history. And some of the people that we've been really fortunate to work with, Indigenous people working for food sovereignty in what's now British Columbia, have reminded us that they've been on that land through 2 ice ages. So collapses happen and people keep going through them and build new systems out of the old systems. We incorporate what's dying in the old world into a holistic picture of the next world. So, and a lot of it involves regaining, re-seeing, respecting Indigenous wisdom, traditionally women's realm of work. All these things I think really have to be at the forefront of our work. And so that's one of the things I think is essential if we're talking about deep adaptation. Let's readapt to becoming human again, and re-honoring the people who've really lived on the planet in harmony for a long time in a lot of contexts, including so many of the people doing really creative economic work are people who are exploited and had to do it out of necessity for generations. So some of our civilization is just beginning to collapse. Some of it has been made to collapse, you know, on an ongoing basis deliberately over time. So really like looking at this through a decolonizing and through a engaging in a serious solidarity, social justice lens.
Beautiful. Thank you. You know, you mentioned a couple of terms in what you were just sharing. I remember you mentioning rehumanizing, and the word that kept coming to me, even though I don't think you said quite this word, is reconnecting. It just seemed like everything you were pointing at was reconnecting us with the web of life itself, with that which we've been so desperately separate from, and at huge cost. And I just wanted to mention what Gems refers to as the 4 R's of deep adaptation, as just another element to talk about and to include as you both lay out the alternatives that may well help out in this transition. And the first is resilience, with hopefully some fairly obvious implications. Resilience, again, my orientation to each of these is through a particularly individual frame, the personal work that one might do. But I think we can shift the use of and the frame for these, all four of these R's, to a community level participation and engagement. So looking at how we can build resilience in any local arrangement, any community. The second would be relinquishment, or what we're willing to let go of. What from the old way of doing things are we willing to let go of in order to free ourselves up to look into new possibilities? The third would be restoration, moral values, behaviors, and sources of strength from our past, our ancestors, or other cultures, particularly, Stephanie, you just mentioned indigenous cultures, that we can learn from and hopefully engage with those older established ways of being. And then the last one would be reconciliation. And so in this time of immense loss and transition, what would we need to make peace with? How will we find peace within ourselves? Some way of making ourselves whole again in this process, in this extraordinary process. So I just wanted to mention those and see if they can be woven in, as you both, I believe, are about to lay out some of the alternatives to the very, very fragile and crumbling systems that we're talking about. Matthew, any thoughts?
Oh, those 4 R's are all really good questions that we can ask ourselves, both individually and in community. I wanted to point out that a lot of the localization movement is done by people at the grassroots. It's not a top-down activity, and you can't ask for power to do it. And so that's a major theme running through Stephanie's work and also my own work in community currencies. It's about people coming together and making agreements with each other about how they're going to exchange and be with each other in the future. And that's kind of resilient. If you think one of the things that's going to collapse is systems of governance and authority, we need to get better at learning how to live together and make decisions with each other.
Absolutely. Is there more that either of you wanted to say? It seems like both of you have a remarkable amount of history and experience with generating alternatives from particularly local and alternative versions of economics. Is there anything that you'd like to say, either of you, about how that's necessary and how that's useful now?
Yeah, I'd be happy to give some examples. So as I mentioned, how globalized capitalism drives things the wrong direction, I think probably most of the audience knows those mechanisms. But all you have to do is look at the jobs versus environment fake conflict that's always been trotted out. That and recognizing that it's just true. Most of the active destruction of the planet is being carried out by people who are hired to do that. Often the best job they can get. So there's a piece of really needing to displace the need to participate in the exploitation economy. Anything that's manufacturing a need that's built on exploiting finite resources, exploiting other people. So just displacing the need to work in that is very important. and looking at just the basics that you can observe. So there's plenty of like theory behind money and things that that we can point to that are problems with it, but just looking around and seeing the impact that it has, people staying in jobs they don't like because that's what they can get. They have to maintain health insurance if they live in this country. People exploiting their neighbors, stealing, participating in illicit markets because that's what's lucrative. So there's all that stuff that needs to be displaced. And then the other mechanisms. So time banking for me has been a very important experiential learning tool. I got involved in time banking from an economic framework, knowing that we needed to build something where we have more agency and aren't really relying on money that's issued by banks as debt issued at interest, that we need to become more independent of that in order to be free to do what we want to do in this world. When I started the time bank, I wasn't like all bought into in time banking. Everyone's time is valued equally and we don't put a price on our time. So my hour is worth your hour, and no matter who we are and what we're doing. I wasn't so excited about that because it didn't fit with my need in my local business. But I also saw time banking as a way to really value so much labor that is not valued in the market economy. And I just categorize that as care, creativity, civic engagement, and community building. All those things are infinitely abundant, and the market economy values scarcity. So time banking really filled this gap. And you can also look at that as women's work, but the kinds of work, and it values people and work that are marginalized explicitly by the patriarchal racist market economy that we've been living in. And when I started engaging in time banking, though, that's when things really shifted for me in ways that I had no idea I had room to shift. But it was a transformative experience for me and a lot of people in my community and other communities who I've talked to participate in an economy as equals is so new to us, and we don't realize in this current context. And that's the thing that I have to keep getting explicit about, is when I say we, I mean me as like a European descent American living in this culture right now. And we have to remember that our experience is very far from universal. So and getting back to, so many people have never gotten to participate in the exploitation economy because they're shut out of it. So but anyhow, with my perspective, participating in time banking really shifted things for me internally in a really important way, and caused me to look around and see potential instead of lack. It introduced me to all kinds of new people and new realities. And it's a great experiential learning tool to break our economic life down into its basics, which is people and what we need and what we have and how it flows. And from there, that's a much healthier ground, in my perspective, from which to do other economic things. So for us, another step that we're going to do is start pooling money and manage it collectively. But by exchanging our time and talents in the time bank, we start to develop our skills at working together and our understandings of each other's strengths. Then we can do more complicated things that require more intensive agreements and more real trust. So we're building that kind of community that then we can build it in service to the things that we know we need to do. Weatherizing all our homes, helping each other implement the small measures to increase energy efficiency, figuring out where the food is going to grow best, having the permaculturists teach us how to do that and build more people's skills at growing food, create nice little neighborhood distribution mechanisms to offer food to each other, have swaps. I mean, we're interested in going from the very lowest tech to the very highest tech. Our permaculture guild leader here reminded us when we were doing our garden project earlier this year. She said, a watershed and a food shed is made up of neighborhoods. So we can develop a regional permaculture informed sort of food distribution system, neighborhood by neighborhood, block by block, house by house, by meeting our neighbors and inviting everyone to participate based on their own strengths and their own needs. So we're building our resilience in, personally, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, and building toward actual real long-term resilience, displacing our need to purchase food from the supermarket, which in many neighborhoods, they don't have that option anyway. By growing healthy food and figuring out how we share it, by weatherizing all our homes and then putting in decentralized renewable energy while we learn together on the way there the newest, best, lowest cost, cleanest technologies. So that's how we take the individual action to the neighborhood economic level, to the changing how we live level, to the using that and connecting that network so we change how our economy works. Because those are, then I exchange between my local network and one across the state. We exchange with Matthew for his knowledge and his software across the world, and we're building the solidarity economy by building the solidarity economy.
Yeah.
And Stephanie, you're doing that with vanishingly little money, as far as I
Yes,
can see.
it's vanishing too quickly and thoroughly. Yes, that's true. And actually, that's part of what mutual aid networks do and are aiming to do, is connect the money with the other ways of sharing and exchanging resources. So our next step is to open common funds and to really invite people who have more access to money to put their money there and know they're going to be governed cooperatively, wisely, in service to this kind of work in economic redesign, creating opportunities for actual voluntary wealth redistribution. So you can support a common fund in a particular community that's going to use that money to build their decentralized renewable energy infrastructure, and they're going to share that knowledge with other communities, maybe yours, and maybe that's the return for your monetary investments.
Yeah.
And so with the money, you're taking on some of the functions of banking and other mega financial corporations. How do you think they'll feel about that?
Well, they'll feel about that similarly to how I feel about their practices, I imagine. So a little healthy competition is, actually, that's how I see what we're doing. Cooperative is a form of corporation. We are already economic agents. I mentioned I co-own a small business, started a fairly decent sized nonprofit time bank. Like, we're already creating the economy. So we're going to also continue to create it in the way we want to. Right now, our country has, which is the United States, in case you're coming in new, this country is really doubling down on corporate control and deregulation. So we're a form of corporation that's ready to compete. And the reason we're going to win is because we invite everyone and it's much more fun.
Yeah, it really seems like what you've got going on, what you've just laid out for us, Stephanie, there was relationship at every step of what you described. It was like the mortar between each of the bricks that you were laying out for us. Matthew, I'm curious, are you sparked to share any of your particular view of these issues after hearing Stephanie?
Well, my knowledge is a bit more theoretical. I have, as a nomad, I've gone around and visited many complementary currency projects, but my head is in the theory. So I just wanted to point out the reason why local community projects have so little money is because the financial system we live in, capitalism, for want of a better word, seems designed to take money from all the people doing the productive work and gradually funnel it up towards the national level, to the big companies, the government, and the CEOs, and then it just sort of hops offshore into a tax haven, and there the money seems to reside and grow while being unavailable for circulation and use as a medium of exchange. And also, since that money is created when we borrow it from banks, when it all ends up in the tax haven, it means it's not available for us to earn back to pay our debts back. And so it's no wonder that working at the grassroots level among productive people, there isn't any spare money with which to rebuild the economy. And so we have to reimagine the economy as an economy of people and of each other, rather than, say, an economy of heavy industry and high tech, which we just can't afford to invest in and build, although there are some laudable projects happening in those areas.
Yeah. I'm sorry to be repetitive, but it's so current for me and so close to home. I have another couple of interviews scheduled in the next day or so with people who are affected by the fires I was just mentioning down in the Bay Area here on the West Coast. And what's one of the pieces, actually two pieces that are just blazingly filling my screen, because I have these friends who are directly, they're suffering. It's not an easy thing. As much as I'm pretty aware of the impact of these fires and what's going on, it wasn't until I realized that there are massive shutdowns of electricity by PG&E, who's basically just covering their ass because they want to avoid another multi-billion-dollar lawsuit, as they've now got many of them stacked up. And just the shutting off of electricity, not to mention the fire and its impact, has been devastating for people who now all the food in their refrigerators is rotted, and the possibility of continuing to go to work and make a living to be able to pay their bills this month is stopped. So it's just this relatively small choice by a gigantic utility is crippling now millions of people in the fifth largest economy. So I guess this is an indirect way for me to plug in a little question about what about reclaiming utilities on a far more local and a publicly owned level. It seemed like there's a built-in toxicity that we're now facing full on by having a profit motive behind our core utilities. And I'd like to just expand it a little bit more if either of you want to speak to it. It seems like that is also true to what you were talking about, Stephanie, with regard to local food programs and food production. To take them out of the national, global, corporatist, and governmental levels in terms of national governmental level, and to bring it down to as local a level as possible for both energy and food. Is there anything either of you would like to say about either of those?
I'm happy to. I completely agree about municipal and local ownership and cooperative ownership of utilities. And it's another situation where it's politically very difficult to accomplish. And the opportunities that our new reality are bringing are unpredictable. So the fact that things are so visibly collapsing and so visibly broken is will work to our benefit if we make sure it works to our benefit, which requires a lot of everybody stepping into their full capacity as humans to be active in this moment. So we'll see how that goes. I think it's very important to always be encouraging that. And in terms of, so once again, the example I was giving about building our capacity at a local level to go toward energy efficiency and renewable energy also builds our understanding of the problem, and it builds our connections as constituents who can then push on a utility company, develop the savvy that you would need to wage a campaign that actually does turn it over to municipal ownership or cooperative ownership. So my part is working from the grassroots up, because I'm really excited to just like do stuff. I also like to demand stuff, that I like to like build power. So when we demand this stuff, we're more likely to have our demands met. And then because you're mentioning the fires, I just really want to make sure to go into this a little bit. We're working with this organization, Mutual Aid Disaster Relief. They're becoming a partner project in the humans, and it's another decentralized network kind of project, really helping local communities build their capacity to be able to respond in a disaster, and also be able to assist other communities in a solidarity kind of way that's more effective than the way a lot of disaster support tends to happen. And one of the visions that we're exploring now is how we can help build our whole community resilience, solidarity, economy picture through helping communities prepare for disaster. So I know that we're on the back end of that in a lot of communities right now, but we all need help in preparing for disasters. And so for example, we have a vision of going door to door and offering like large containers to store water, various kinds of, solar powered radio or different kinds of things that can increase people's resilience. Also give us an opportunity to map who's in the neighborhood, what their needs might be, who's going to need to be checked on in a disaster, and build the community ties that can help us be resilient. And one of the things that's coming up over and over again is when there is a disaster, people always respond in a beautiful mutual aid, loving kind of way. It's wired in us, and we need to just see that and make that happen pre-disaster. And so again, like, our vision is to build an economy that's on those actions specifically, just by valuing them. And we can do that. We can do it right now. All we have to do is value them with each other.
You've sparked me to remember one of the most potent local programs, and I'm curious if you have it where you are, Stephanie, and then Matthew, if you're aware of any in the UK or wherever. I think you said you're in Italy. I'm curious, the local program here is called CERT, Community Emergency Response Team. And it's a multi-week, one night a week training for people in a neighborhood to come together and to share, find out what the local resources are, find out what the local needs are in their neighborhood, who would need special attention if they have mobility difficulty, and so on. Just this remarkably rich relationship-based and community-based way of deepening engagement with one another, with all under the pretense of preparing for possible disasters or trouble in a community. I'm curious if you have anything like that, Stephanie, and again, Matthew, if you've seen any in European or UK versions of that kind of preparedness. What I can say is that it has really helped me with the exact kind of expansion that I'm experiencing in this conversation, taking it from my kind of solo, solo view of building up the internal skills and capacities to be present in the face of larger and larger stressors. I'm getting a sense now of how many different opportunities there are to interweave with others rather than feeling kind of alone and doing my work and, well-intended, but it's feeling like there's this kind of naturalness, this kind of breathing, inhaling and expanding in our conversation. So I should just stop. Stephanie, have you seen anything like that kind of a program where you are?
I haven't yet, so I'll look into it, but I'm not aware of one, and it sounds really good. And again, that's part of the point of our network is so we can know about those things in other places and quickly and easily adopt them. We are working toward a different kind, and we do have a crisis response team, but we're focused, a number of people and organizations locally are working toward how we have a civilian crisis response team who you could call in the event of a mental health crisis to reduce your chance of having your loved one shot.
Yeah, thank you.
And New Zealand, actually, I got a chance to travel through New Zealand in this context, and I did. They have a number of I don't remember what it's called, maybe something like civil defense projects like what you're talking about, engaging the community in crisis response because they're so prone to earthquakes.
Yeah. So I'm
I
curious.
can't think of anything going on in Europe like that, but I do know of the project in New Zealand, Littleton, where they're right next to Christchurch, and they had a huge earthquake in about 2011. But after that, Littleton started its own resilience project because they were connected to the rest of the country through a tunnel, which could very easily be blocked. And so everyone became very nervous and started cooperating on that basis.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm curious for both of you, just on a more personal note, when you look at your own lives now and how you're engaged with your community, there seems to be my shorthand for this whole process of what can I do as a concerned person to become more engaged, to become, as I mentioned before, to expand my capacity to be present. What can I do? I've really been taking a rigorous inventory in myself, and really it's kind of been painfully, sometimes embarrassingly real how few resources I have that lean toward this kind of relationship, Stephanie, that you've been talking about, layer upon layer in a community. And Matthew, you know, what you're describing with generating alternative economic models and currencies in a community, these are all just huge risks that it means that I personally, if I engage with it, I need to let go of all that I've known, all that I've grown up with, all that I thought was supposed to take care of us forever. And it's so obviously not. And even though I know these things, I can still be so anxious about it. I can still be so reluctant to let go of that rung to reach for the next one. I don't know if this is making sense to you.
A very gradual engagement, Dean. You don't just jump into the pool and hand over all your money to Stephanie and say, I might want it back someday. You can. It can be just a step at a time. If it's a question of getting to know your neighbors, you know, you don't go around and invite yourself to dinner on the first day, for example.
Maybe that's the problem that I've been having. Okay, please, I'm sorry, go ahead. Keep going.
And it's the same with complementary currencies. You could join the scheme and do nothing at all. It costs you nothing, there's no risk. But then even when you do something, you have the benefit of a human interaction, whether you are giving or receiving, and then you have the hope of the reciprocation which follows. And so at that level, at the beginning of engagement, there's really no risk that I can see. And it requires lots and lots of people to enter into deeper engagement together, gradually leaning on each other in order to start building these new structures and infrastructures. And so it's really very slow process. And Stephanie can speak to that much better than me, having been directly engaged in it for so many years. As a nomad, it's not something that I myself have been able to do very much of at all. And I'm only now starting to think about where to engage.
Yeah, great. And I was just saying that's a perfect image with the ladder, because when you reach up, you keep your other hand on here and you keep your feet on that one for now. And then you go up step by step. And that is the challenge. And I would say, and that has been the challenge that we're aiming to help with, is it needs to be a situation where everyone who wants to do this, where you don't have to just start your own project, or that we can help you find the people around you to connect with. So that's where we are in the humans and mutual aid networks, is trying to create a lot of ways to invite people in. So one simple thing you can do is join the humans. It's you can go to mutualaidnetwork.org and you can join this global co-op, and you can put up an offer, and you can experiment with earning human hours for helping someone with a podcast. I actually know a couple of people who are looking for help with podcasts. So you can participate a little bit in this global sort of time bank, and then you can see if you want to do more projects. And then we're aiming to make some nice, simple tools so you'd be able to find the people near you who want to work in community projects. And we also help guide people, like if you know some people already who might want to start something in your community, we're offering a lot of skill shares and just basic technical assistance for people about how to bring your local people together, how to identify your common vision, see their roles, find the next steps, because we want it to be easy for you. And then in each community, we want to create a lot of invitations. So someone can dip a toe in, and someone else can jump in completely. And that's the whole aim, is we provide more and more security for each other. And it doesn't have to be all at once. And in fact, it's not possible for it to be all at once. So everyone goes step by step, starting from where they are. And some of the diehards like me and Matthew and other like project stewards will, like I have all my skin in the game at this point, but I wouldn't expect everyone else to.
Yeah.
And then, that's the thing, is we help, everybody helps to invite the next outward circle in, and we keep building that way, and again creates a neighborly global economy by creating networks of real trust that connect across each other, and new networks of real trust.
Yeah. Stephanie, I thank you for mentioning a few of the websites and resources that you've mentioned, and I'm going to ask you in a moment to think if there are any others, particularly seminal books that you would recommend, or websites that are just kind of the go-to resources for a person like myself who's really interested but not knowing where to start. And I'll of course be including in the show notes the Deep Adaptation Forum information, how people can connect with that, and also the Positive Deep Adaptation Facebook page. I would recommend for people who are on the more personal side of the deep adaptation work and frame, like wanting to connect with other people, wanting to find out what is this stuff and how can I engage with it, what are other people doing, and then I think it's likely that there will be other opportunities to expand in a way that's right for each person when they approach. I know that in the Deep Adaptation Forum, there are a number of different special interest groups that people might be able to find what their particular flavor of engagement is and expand from there. So are there books, are there particular other websites that we can include here on this particular conversation and really plant the seeds for people who want to step now?
For me, the books that have changed my perspective have, well, there have been a lot, but books by Bernard Lietaer, The Future of Money was what got me on this whole path, but also one called Of Human Wealth, Beyond Greed and Scarcity, I think is what it's called. Yeah, for just gaining a perspective on what's possible. And Debt, The First 5,000 Years by David Graeber was very important to me. The book 1491. And then if you look at mutualaidnetwork.org, we really aim to share a lot of resources from there and outward from our projects. And for me, the most, what I've learned from the most is connecting with different people and projects And especially learning more from our Indigenous friends, learning what it means, what Indigenous food sovereignty is about, and how looking at sort of food security and food autonomy through an Indigenous food sovereignty lens really changes the picture and really helps clarify the need for the levels of ecological integrity we need. So I would say, like Indigenous food sovereignty work in general that I've just been exposed to through people, but we will be sharing some more writing through mutual aid networks. So I'll leave it there for me. That's what comes to mind.
Okay. Is there anything you might like to add to that list, Matthew?
Yeah, I would say less of a focus on the economy, but do go and have a look at the Transition Network or Transition Towns. The Global Eco Village Network is doing really great stuff in building intentional communities. And more United States focused is the Intentional Communities Network. I think it's ic.org. So those kind of more intense communities are not for everybody, but they are doing great pioneering work.
Great. Well, I got to admit, I am expanded, and I really didn't know what to expect. I think I know a decent amount about these conversations, particularly, obviously I have that more, individual focused and individual process focused that's built into my life choices. And as I look to expand out, I'm encouraged, and I thank you both, because again, all I can see is the larger version of what I've been experiencing, which is again that kind of reluctance to let go of the familiar, no matter how obviously I need to move on. We all need to move on, and I just appreciate the obvious years of commitment and of personal engagement that you both bring to this. And I've learned a lot, and I appreciate hearing about resources, and I particularly appreciate knowing that I don't have to reinvent the wheel, because I feel so completely inept, ill-prepared. These are concepts, these are whole aspects of being a human being in these times that I don't know anything about. And so I very much appreciate both of you laying out those wheels that have indeed been invented and are just waiting for engagement. Is there anything that either of you would like to say to finish up?
It's super underreported, the really local level activism of the type that Stephanie does and community currencies. Some of the things just hum along in the background and they don't really generate any news. But all the journalists are looking elsewhere for the California fire stories and the politics stories. And so the good things that are happening don't get into the media, and they don't help to make people feel good or connect them to what's going on around them.
Yeah.
Well, soon we're going to help a local guy meet his dream. He wants to start a soul station on the radio in Madison. And to help him toward his dream, our mutual aid network is going to start a podcast called Free Soul Radio. And we're going to share a bunch of the stories of what's happening, because that's what we need now. My perspective is that this worldview that some of us have been operating in for a short time in this history, that this worldview has made us blind to the ways that people have generally lived, and it's made us just disregard a lot of ancient knowledge, a lot of very intrinsic knowledge, a lot of value all around us. And I think much of what we need to do is get back to seeing that and seeing what's valuable. And it is about perspective, and it's so hard to accept. The economy is a social construct, and that we can have this imaginary social construct driving our behavior in a way that kills us and our neighborhoods and our planets is insane and absurd. And people are waking up to that. And a thing that I would like to encourage you to keep in mind, Dean, is it's going to be a lot more fun when you let go of that ladder. You will fly or something. And yeah, no one's being, I mean, we're being pushed out of our comfort zone. Things are changing all around us, and the ways that we are creating, Matthew and I and people all over the world are creating to help you through that process are enjoyable and welcome to that world.
Well, both of you, thank you so much. It's been, again, just important and informational and relational for me. And it's good to get to know both of you and get to know some of the possibilities that are out in front of us. And for making deep adaptation a bit more applicable on a larger scale than I've contemplated before. Thank you both. And I look forward to, hopefully, our next time to have a conversation just like this.
Thank you.
Cheers, Dean.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.